We pay respect to the Triple Gem. I would like to invite the Luang Po to lead thing. You can mute your microphone, but you can chanting together. Okay. นิมนต์ครับหลวงพ่อครับ
อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวะพุทธังภะคะวันตังอภิวาเทสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนะมัสสามิโยปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนะมามิธัมมยังพุทธัสสะภะคะวะโตบุพพาคันนมการังกะโลมาเสนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ Okay, before we start talking about the Buddhism today, last Sunday, last Saturday, I'm sorry because I have to stay with on you all the time. Today we have time to listen from the speaker about the Buddhism today. Before starting, I need to someone to introduce for the person who talking the Dhamma today. Thank you. Nimon.
Thank you for most venerable. And okay, I would like to invite the Dr. Tanat or Vitet Ratanaporn from the Wat Thai Klung Washington DC to introduce the Casey to give a talk today. Okay, then.
Okay. Pay respect to the most venerable Pra Te Putivitet, the president of the Council of the Thai Bhikhuss and all committees of the CTU. And good morning and good evening for the followers of the all Buddhists from many places. And also today we are luckily to have Casey Thompson. She will give a talk about the Paticcasamuppada or dependent origination. The Dhamma today is very important. Even this is the second talk of her, but last time I also be witness with all of you to hear the Dhamma from her explanation. And today also she will explain in because the Dhamma is so many aspects, so many interpretation that we can apply in our daily life. And Paticcasamuppada, I can say that, not I can say, but the Buddha said that the cause of suffering in Tuk, Samudaya, Nirodha, and Makkha in the Four Noble Truths. In Samudaya, or the cause of suffering, is include the in Paticcasamuppada, as the Buddha mentioned, because it will be very clear if you want to understand the cause of suffering, you have to learn Paticcasamuppada. The cause of suffering, the linkage of the 12 mental defilements or 12 kilesa. That's the cause of suffering. So we can learn from her today, or you can learn from other teacher, but this platform provide all of you to hear the Dhamma and discuss and ask. Casey Thompson, the one who study and practice the Dhamma from, as I learned, that you learn from Wat Attammayataram, or you are the student of this temple. So if you look around in the painting in the Buddha Hall in Wat Attammayataram, you can see the picture or the painting of the Paticcasamuppada. That picture, first, long time ago, when I was the student of Mahajula Buddhist University, we go to practice the Dhamma with Luang Por Buddhadasa in the south, in the Son Mokhapraram. The first time that I've seen this picture in Wat Son Mok, and it's a draw intention to understand that explain into Thai or into any language, to explain by the painting, the picture that depict all of the, because of it's very difficult to explain how to explain the avijja, tanha, upadhan, or contact, or attachment, or any mental defilements that formless. But Luang Por Buddha tried to explain in the form of painting to compare with the kilesa or mental defilement. So very easy to understand the 12 linkages of the Paticcasamuppada. So today, Casey Thompson will explain in her understanding and according to the sutra, or according to the in Pitaka that talking about the Paticcasamuppada. So it is the time to listen to the Dhamma Talk or Dhamma explanation by Casey Thompson. Okay, thank you very much for your talking today. Okay, welcome to give a talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tanat. I'm so grateful for that introduction, and I'm just so grateful to be here. It's been such a blessing to me to have these talks every Saturday and learn so much, and such a blessing to have this motivation to study the Dhamma more deeply over these past few months. It's been a huge blessing in my life. This talk is a lot more intense than the last one, so I'll do my best. It's also pushing the limits of my own understanding, so I appreciate any feedback or corrections by the venerables afterwards if I make any mistakes. Thusness, Beyond Dependent Origination. This talk was mostly inspired by the book Under the Bodhi Tree by Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. Everyone can see it okay?
Yes.
Yep, good, okay. Iddhipacayata, law of conditionality. When this exists, this naturally exists. Due to the arising of this consequently arises. When this does not exist, this naturally does not exist. Due to the quenching of this consequently is quenched. This slide I had last time, but now I want to go a little bit deeper into it as how it relates to Paticcasamuppada or dependent origination. When speaking generally about any kind of phenomena whatsoever, whether mental or physical, animate or inanimate, having to do with human beings or not, we use the word conditionality, iddhipacayata. The law of conditionality is broad and general. When speaking specifically about sentient beings that experience feelings of happiness and suffering, We use the word dependent co-arising, paticca samuppada. It applies to things with a mental life, to the inner world, with world of consciousness, and precisely refers to how suffering arises in sentient beings. This is really important distinction because the law of conditionality applies to all things. It's the law of the natural world. Once we understand that paticca samuppada, or dependent co-arising, is the law of conditionality operating as an autopilot in a way in the background of our minds and our unconscious, it helps us to start to have a better grasp on this whole situation. I just want to summarize briefly the 12 links of dependent origination that I introduced in the last talk, and I have this illustration here to help. This is going to be really fast. Ignorance that we have a permanent self or I concept is the first link. Everything depends on that ignorance. Volitional formations, I'm going to talk about a lot today. They can be bodily, verbal, or mental. They're the seeds from our past habits, our karma, waiting to be reinforced with future turns of the wheel of dependent origination. Consciousness is awareness through the 6 sense bases. So there's 6 types of consciousness according to our 6 sense bases. Our mind and body, our physical form. Then we have our 6 sense bases through which we perceive the external world, and with the mind, our internal world as well. Contact can be either external or an internal stimuli. Feeling, Vedana. This is the sensation that happens at the moment of contact. So it's not emotions, it's just the sensation as a result of contact. Craving is then the feeling that arises of I like it or I don't like it in response to contact. All of this is happening many, many times a second, usually below conscious awareness. Clinging is the story about why I don't like it or why I like it. And it's usually the story that we have going through our thoughts and our heads that we're more familiar with, where we can interrupt the cycle. Birth and habits is when we reinforce our habits and the I concept for future turns of the wheel through our actions. And then aging, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair as a result. I just want to come back to having going through my tiles here. Can everybody see them?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. With ignorance as condition, formations come to be. With formations as condition, consciousness comes to be. With consciousness as condition, name and form comes to be. With name and form as condition, the 6 sense bases come to be. With the 6 sense bases as condition, contact comes to be. With contact as condition, feeling, Vedana, comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving comes to be. With craving as condition, clinging comes to be. With clinging as condition, habits come to be. With habits as condition, birth comes to be. With birth as condition, aging, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And the reason why I use the tiles like this is because, just like dominoes, each link is dependent on the next, on the one before it for its existence. So if we interrupt the wheel, then the links can no longer exist. Then that changes everything. So if we notice that we're clinging and we release that clinging, then that's helping our suffering a lot. I'll talk more about that as we go. Here's an example of like how the mind can work. We start out the day, I know I do, with good intentions. Today I will live in the moment, unless the moment is unpleasant, in which case I will eat a cookie. So right there, she has many links already going where she has habits. If things are unpleasant, then her habit is to eat a cookie in response to try to feel better. But it's just creating suffering for herself because she doesn't know about the wheel of dependent origination. She says, I love routine. Until I'm bored, then I love excitement. Until I'm overwhelmed, then I love routine. The mind does this. It bounces between things. It goes between things looking for relief and satisfaction, but rarely finding any. I want to go in deeper into the second link in the 12. Volitional formations. Thus, when we put the word sankhara under our microscope, we see compressed within it the entire worldview of the Dhamma. The active sankharas consisting in comically active volitions perpetually create the sankhara of the 5 aggregates that constitute our being. As long as we continue to identify with the 5 aggregates, the work of ignorance, and to seek enjoyment in them, the work of craving, we go on spewing out the volitional formations that build up future combinations of aggregates. Just that is the nature of samsara, an unbroken procession of empty but efficient sankharas producing still other sankharas, riding up in fresh waves with each new birth, swelling to a crest, and then crashing down into old age, illness, and death. Yet on it goes, shrouded in the delusion that we're in control, sustained by an ever-tantalizing, ever-receding hope of final satisfaction. That was written by Bhikkhu Bodhi in an article that he wrote in 2005. I think the sankhara are very important because they're operating below our conscious mind, where our habits are stored in long-term memory. I want to talk a little bit more about that and the psychology behind this. So the wheel of dependent origination is turning multiple times a second below our conscious awareness. Volitional formations, the second link of dependent origination after ignorance, are the culmination of our past habits before this moment. They're waiting to be reactivated with sense contact and thus reinforced. They contain the seeds for future turns of the wheel. 95% of our thoughts are below our conscious awareness, so the unconscious mind controls our behavioral impulses most of the time. Therefore, when we work to deeply understand the 12 links of dependent origination, we are reprogramming our subconscious mind and changing our habits to be more skillful with wisdom until finally we no longer have habits and are fluid in each moment with awareness and able to apply appropriate skillful means in that moment. This is the same slide as I had last time, just to briefly go over again about how the human information processing system works. We have stimuli, and then the sensory memory is just that brief recognition. So if we're seeing something, say somebody's phone number, we can only remember 3 to 7 units of that number unless we're an expert at remembering things and we chunk it up. Now, if we don't pay attention to what we're remembering, we'll immediately forget it. If we pay attention to it, it goes into working memory, and that's just 7 to 9 items, and that's when we usually rehearse something to attach it to our long-term memories that we already have. So in that way, we are choosing how we see our world and what we attend to. If we don't rehearse that thing, then we forget about it again. Bhikkhus. Whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of his mind. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of sensual desire, he has abandoned the thought of renunciation to cultivate the thought of sensual desire, and then his mind inclines to thoughts of sensual desire. If he frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of ill will, upon thoughts of cruelty, he has abandoned the thought of non-cruelty to cultivate the thought of cruelty, and then his mind inclines to thoughts of cruelty. And this is a cartoon about Ned not having the chicken or the bluebird of happiness anymore, and now he's visited by the chicken of depression. Ned is deep into dependent origination cycle there, and that's what happens to all of us, unfortunately. Some people worse. I want to talk a little bit more about delusion and how we are all sleeping Buddhas and what a precious opportunity this life is that we've been given. After the night of his enlightenment, having seen the 12 links of dependent origination, both forwards and backwards, the Buddha declared himself to be self-awakened. In realizing the full truth of the law of conditionality as it is applied to sentient beings, he was awakened from all hypnotic trances and free from delusion. After I learned about dependent origination, I got a certificate in hypnotherapy so that I could understand better how we become hypnotized in life. And what I learned is that we're constantly going in and out of functional hypnotic trances. Anything we do automatically, such as walking or driving a car, making a recipe, anything familiar to us is considered to be a functional hypnotic trance. The definition of hypnosis is a narrowing of attention. Anytime we're subject to the 12 links of dependent origination, our attention has been narrowed to believe that we have a permanent and lasting self. And this is really the core thing that we're going to talk more about in this talk. People become hypnotized through repetition and also through vividness and emotional intensity. The idea of a permanent and lasting self is the core hypnotic trance, and all therapy is based around the idea of repairing this core self that is hurting itself through ignorance of the 12 links of dependent origination arising and passing away. Okay, so a little bit more about how attention is selective. We have lots and lots of sensory inputs going around us at any given time. But it's what we attend to that then focuses our attention. In this case, the lady is reading a book and she's ignoring lots of other things going on around her. So there's lots of sensory stimuli around her that she may hear, but they're dropping out of her memory. She's not recalling them. If you were to ask her about what she did at the park, she will remember what she read, and she may remember a few things that made it into her long-term memory and into her awareness. This is an example. I want to talk a little bit more about how the mind works in terms of attending to information and not. This is called the Invisible Gorilla Experiment, and you can Google it and watch it on YouTube for yourself. It's the example of what's called a negative hallucination. So in this YouTube video, they play it. They tell you that your job is to count the number of passes of the basketball between people wearing a white shirt. And the first time I did that, I counted the passes. And I thought I had done great. Then they slowed it down and showed it again. And they showed that a man in a gorilla suit walked on slowly, beat his chest, and walked off. And I never saw it. I watched it a second time, this time not paying as much attention to how they were passing the ball and waiting for the gorilla. And that time I saw it clear as day. So it's a powerful example of how we edit out information from our environment based on our past habits, which is, the volitional formations piece I was talking about earlier. This is an example of a positive hallucination. Positive hallucination is when we put things into the world that isn't really there. Our brains are designed to be meaning makers. Like when we watch movies and there's blank spaces in between each frame that we don't see, we edit them out automatically. We put together a continuous movie that we watch in our minds. The same thing is true of the world and things we see around us. In this case, you can, depending on where you place your attention, you can see a young woman turning away from you. You can see her eyelash there. Or you can see an older woman with her head sort of tilted down and a large nose. Just depends on where you place your attention. And both of those are things that our brain is sort of putting in the environment, but it shows about how shifting attention works and how we make meaning from it. One of the core beliefs and fundamental beliefs of Western thought, I remember being taught this when I was taking history in college, is René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. This was one of the pinnacles of the basis of the rest of Western thought. And this is the fundamental human misconception that the Buddha discovered, is that the idea that there's a permanent self, an I concept. So I think, therefore I am, is what he is asserting. We reinforce this in our culture all the time. This is not a great picture, but it's showing affirmations. You know, I am good, I'm loyal, I'm generous. We try and support ourselves up, because we get to feeling down in the dumps. But unfortunately, none of that is working, like Bhikkhu Bodhi said in his quote, because there is no I fundamentally. That's the core problem here. This is another thing I remember in 5th grade taking very seriously. We were taught Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we were taught that our job in this world is to go out and self-actualize ourselves. So I learned very early on that it wasn't simply good enough to be a Casey, that I had to be a particularly good Casey, and that my Casey-ness had to be better than other people because it was a competition in a lot of ways. So there was this pyramid, and I had to be the absolute best Casey that I could be. So again, it's reinforcing that I concept. This is taken from Saturday Night Live when I was in high school, Gary Smalley. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. So again, he's feeling sad, upset, he's having suffering, and he's thinking that if he can affirm his self and support it, he'll feel better. And unfortunately, it's still that same core hypnotic trance that's going to keep causing suffering. The hero's journey is something that I actually spent years researching. And it's a powerful mythological structure developed by Joseph Campbell. It's the basis for many of the world's myths. And it's also the basis now for many of the movies we watch on television. So our brain tends to understand the hero's journey very easily, and we're kind of wired that way by all the stories we're told in our lifetimes. Now, in this journey, though, you have somebody who's kind of normal, and they go on a adventure, and then they approach lots of challenges. We all know the story. And what they're looking for is to get their reward after the ordeal, the big trophy. That's what they want to bring home, is that they're the hero. And then they go back to their village wiser and able to teach something, and with their trophy. And that's, again, part of that permanent self-I concept, is trying to prove ourselves, get the reward. And again, it's reinforcing suffering. And as we can see from most of the movies, that's why we have part 1, 2, and 3, is because the first movie ends when the hero comes back with the reward and he's happy, or she's happy. But then the second movie starts when the hero's down in the dumps again and has to then go on another adventure, because the happiness never lasts, because it's still subject to the wheel of dependent origination. Bhikhuss, you may well cling to that doctrine of self that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who clings to it. But do you see any such doctrine of self, Bhikhuss? No, venerable sir. Good Bhikhuss, I too do not see any doctrine of self that would not arouse sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who clings to it. Buddha's very clear about this. Here's another, I love this cartoon by SpongeBob, me trying to find out who's ruining my life, and it's himself, wanted this maniac. That's the core of it, is that we're responsible for creating our reality in terms of how we place our attention in our world around us and in our minds, and then we're ultimately responsible for our own suffering. Dependent co-arising has the aim of destroying clinging to self and clinging to words and concepts about self. Clinging to ideas and terms of I and mine is the basic root attachment. Dependent co-arising is an exquisitely refined teaching of how everything is not self. That's by Ajahn Buddhadasa. And then this is sort of funny. I like it because he says, I think, therefore I am. It's a vicious circle. And that's exactly what it is. It is a vicious circle of dependent origination that he is unwittingly talking about there. Now we get to some of the consequences of having the misconception of a permanent I self, of eternalism and annihilationism on each side. Venerable Sir, can there be agitation about what is non-existent internally? There can be, Bhikkhu, the Blessed One said. Here, Bhikkhu, someone has the view. That which is the self is the world. After death, I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change. I shall endure as long as eternity. He hears the Tathagata, or a disciple of the Tathagata, teaching the Dhamma for the elimination of all standpoints, decisions, obsessions, adherences, and underlying tendencies, for the stilling of all formations, for the relinquishing of all attachments, for the destruction of craving, for dispassion, for cessation, for nibbana. He thinks thus, so I shall be annihilated, so I shall perish, so I shall be no more. Then he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. That is how there is agitation about what is non-existent internally. When we're not practicing meditation regularly, I can actually relate to this. I had trouble studying the Dhamma for a few years after I learned about dependent origination at one point because of this exact issue of worrying that it meant that there was no God and it was all annihilationism, and so what's the point? And before that, I'd been too stuck in eternalism. So it's very important to softly help people who don't understand that everything is okay. There's ways to support people, but these are the common misconceptions that people can fall into. I fall into them still. So this is a cartoon showing this fear of annihilation, and it gets down to the thought of if we don't have thoughts, then we don't exist. I think, therefore, what was I thinking about? And then he disappears again, about Descartes. So this happened to me a lot after I had the brain tumor that I talked about in my last talk. Because when I'd get disoriented and I'd wake up in the present moment and not know who I was or where I was, there was a little bit of a deep fear that if there were no thoughts, there was no person, there was no identity. And so the importance of the Buddha's teaching is how to cultivate an experience with emptiness so that we no longer attach to thoughts as being who we are as a core person. It's a very important shift that we need to make in order to truly understand dependent origination. This is another misconception that I had. Dependent origination is the middle way. All exists, Kachana. This is one extreme. All does not exist. This is the second extreme. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. When I was taught about Buddhism in 10th grade, we were taught that the middle way meant that the Buddha learned that being a strict ascetic and not eating and being very strict led to suffering, and that being someone who, like a prince, indulging all your desires also leads to suffering. And so the middle way sort of meant everything in moderation. That is not at all what the Buddha is talking about. The Buddha is teaching that the middle way is between annihilationism and eternalism. And it's this idea that there's another way to be in this world that does not contain a permanent I concept. And it requires understanding of how the links of dependent origination are working as automatic pilot in our minds. The practice is to make the non-arising of grasping and clinging absolute, final, and eternally void, so that no grasping and clinging can ever return. Just that is enough. There is nothing else to do. Buddhadasa. So then what do we replace it with if we're so used to having things be a permanent I concept? And that's thusness or suchness. The highest Dhamma, the highest truth that we must realize for the sake of complete non-clinging is thusness. Phenomena are naturally simply thus, just like that, merely such. When all these things are seen as simply thus, just like that, there will not be any clinging either to the positive or the negative. We do not realize thusness by waiting around for it to appear. There is a sequence of insights and realizations that culminate in realizing thusness. That is, we begin with experiencing and seeing impermanence or inconstancy. Next, we see that impermanent conditioned things that are always changing and difficult to endure cannot be found to have a real substantial self. This insight is not self, that such things cannot establish themselves independently as lasting selves. Part of my PhD was doing research on experts and novices. I did a lot of research on various experts and novices in different subject matter areas, but geography was my specialty. So just talk about this a little bit and how we learn new concepts. So a novice has many fewer concepts than an expert. This illustration doesn't adequately represent that, and not many connections between them. Just the few ideas of things kind of out there, not sure how they interconnect, no examples, and some misconceptions. Once someone starts studying something quite a bit, they're a student, they're a competent practitioner. Then we have more concepts. They have usually the core concepts, especially if they've been taught well, and they have the core linkages between concepts. But they still might not have deep examples, deep interconnections between everything, and they probably still have some misconceptions. An expert, it takes 10,000 hours of study approximately to become an expert, and approximately 7 to 10 years of study. Experts have many, many concepts. They're very well interconnected. They have deep explanations for everything, and they don't have misconceptions. So this is just to explain a little bit of how much dedication it takes in daily life, trying to watch the wheel of dependent origination in our own lives and in our own minds and in meditation, so that we can try to become experts and to shift our habits. This is another picture, sorry, it's not very high quality, showing how novices don't have very much overlap between what the problem is really about and what they're focusing on, whereas experts have a high degree of overlap on what the salient features of the problem are. So they really understand the matter. We cannot adequately practice understanding dependent origination until we practice for many hours, trying to see how it's constantly popping up, because it's a very tricky thing that our mind finds ways to get around understanding all the time. The eye always wants to come back. I can attest to that. So how do we begin? Buddhadasa Bhikkhu said, study and practice both begin with dependent co-arising. Let me stress this again, that we start by studying and practicing dependent co-arising, especially the formula beginning with sense contact. The Buddha advises us to start with knowing the eye and visual forms, then knowing the visual consciousness that arises dependent on them. Sense contact is happening every day, all the time. We start here, knowing contact, then observing and knowing the arising of feelings of pleasure and pain and whatever follows. We investigate this continuously and increasingly deeply. The Buddha talked about humming dependent co-arising pretty continuously as a way to reinforce it. I love this sutta. In dependence on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Then there's somewhere in between. In dependence on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving. And notice he stops at craving. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving comes cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of existence. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So again, craving is the I like it or I don't like it. If we can have awareness at that point, we might not have awareness with sense contact yet. Our mindfulness might not be that sharp. But if we can have awareness at the point of craving, then we can release that from happening and creating more suffering. And that's cessation. The Anapanasati Sutta is so important. Mindfulness of breathing for understanding, witnessing dependent origination. Because meditation allows us a chance to see it more clearly. And we have to get automatic about being able to watch those 12 links. The 4 foundations of mindfulness trained through mindfulness of breathing is contemplating the body thoroughly, breath body and flesh body. The flesh body can be trained with the breath body. I learned in my hypnotherapy program that our thoughts are linked to our body and our breath. So if we're calming our breathing and focusing on our breathing, then our thoughts naturally calm down. And that slows mindfulness and our ability to see it more clearly in meditation. Contemplating all feelings of pleasure and pain based in sense experience are thoroughly understood. Being able to regulate Vedana is the path to regulating the mind. So that's when the point of contact, when the sensation happens and we experience the feeling of that sensation, if we can apply mindfulness at that moment, then we don't need to go into craving and clinging. Contemplating mind that is concocted with such feelings. Mind both acts and experiences. We must understand every kind of mind, learn how to make mind joyful, and learn how to make mind calm. Mindfulness with breathing cleans the mind and gives stability and activeness. I'm glad that Ajahn Prayat is here today. He's the one that taught me about this. He said that the meditation is like a bath for the inside, and that we take showers regularly to clean our bodies on the outside, but we need to do meditation regularly to clean our mind on the inside. And that's exactly right. It's crucial. Contemplating nature truth so that mind does not cling by seeing impermanent suffering and not self, and realizing conditionality. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 118. So this gets very tricky even after we're studying the Dhamma. You know, Dharma, these Zen practices are definitely a short path to ego loss. Almost right away, my illusion of self began to fade. Soon I will be the most advanced novice in the monastery. So again, he's trying to get to the top of the pyramid, and he still has his self there, and it's just hiding. So that's something that our minds do all the time. I'm going to go through this much more quickly than it deserves, but it's something that just to introduce so that people can come back to. These 9 eyes are the most direct shortcut to penetrate to the heart of Buddhism, which is the end of Buddhism, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. Impermanence, this is the start of seeing thusness. Unsatisfactoriness or dukkha is having to live with impermanent, uncertain things. Not self is a deeper level of thusness. Seeing the naturalness of anicca, anatta, and dukkha is standing in the Dhamma. You have a firm foundation. I like that, to think about how last week Loka talked about the bank that holds the Dhamma in so it doesn't seep out. That's what understanding these things do for us. Lawfulness of all nature. Seeing dependent origination as natural law, witnessing that in our daily lives moment to moment. Conditionality, idappaccayata, the fundamental principle of dependent origination. Seeing conditionality is to see dependent origination. Emptiness, sunyata, or voidness. When we clearly see that there is only the stream of dependent co-arising, we see that there cannot be a self in any of this, which is to realize emptiness. That's the key. Thusness, suchness, a deep realization that all things are empty of self, of a personal I. Unconcoctability, the state of not being affected by anything. Equanimity, meditation really helps with that. Clinging begins to dissolve. Gradual fading away is called viraga. Fading away leads to clenching. Quenching leads to liberation. All the things we've ever clung to, we relinquish them all to nature and emptiness. The 7 factors of enlightenment. And how does a bhikkhu, based upon virtue, established upon virtue, develop the 7 factors of enlightenment? Here, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing and release. He develops the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states, which is investigation of the Dhamma, the enlightenment factor of energy, the enlightenment factor of rapture, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, the enlightenment factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing and release. It is in this way, bhikkhu, that a bhikkhu based upon virtue, established upon virtue, develops the 7 factors of enlightenment and thereby achieves greatness and expansiveness in wholesome states. One of the big things that I learned in my practice is how important it is to understand that every moment is a meditation. it's good that we practice meditation and that we experience these things. And this is definitely, there's a whole bunch contained in here that requires a lot of study that I'm not talking about today, that would be in another Dhamma talk. But once we realize that every moment is also a meditation, all these things are things that we need to bring with us every day as we get more skillful. And I'm still working hard at this, in the process of it very much every day, is trying to maintain that mindfulness at the point of sense contact. And some days are easy and some days I'm lost. Some days I have a permanent eye, some days are better. So it's something that we just keep practicing, but to know that every moment is meditation, I think is really important. Buddhadasa talked about how we are spiritual farmers, and this picture on the right I had last time. It's the path of enlightenment, and Ajahn Riti introduced this to me, and it's showing how the mind is getting cleaner and the kilesas going away as the more someone meditates and the more the mind calms down, and until finally emptiness towards the end. So this goes along with this quote. The spiritual farmer must use these same 7 factors. So those are the factors of enlightenment I just talked about. But now on a higher level, first, she is attentive to the flow of events in the mind. With this mindfulness, she chooses and takes up the most appropriate Dhamma principle for each situation. Knowing what principle to practice, she arouses energy and puts effort into that practice. Through correct practice, non-sensual satisfaction and joy arise. This satisfaction has a healthy effect on the body and mind. They both calm down. Then the mind is finally able to stabilize and focus, and with Upekkha watching over that concentrated mind, it looks deeply into the nature of the things until it understands how to make everything correct. Continuing to develop and perfect these 7 factors of awakening, the spiritual farmer eventually reaps the finest harvest, the highest blessing, the ability to make everything correct. It's a great quote. So if we don't have a permanent self, then what do we have? We are each an ongoing, moment-by-moment process. Now, Bhikkhus, this is the way leading to the cessation of identity. One regards the I thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards forms thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards I consciousness thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards I contact thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards feeling thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards craving thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. I love this practice. It's one of the things I use to try to help me remember. The result of all this, if we're practicing correctly, is a deep and abiding compassion and loving kindness towards all living beings, that we're all caught in this wheel of suffering, and deep compassion for the suffering of all living beings. This is part of the Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one skilled in the good. Having made the breakthrough to that peaceful state, he should be able, upright, and very upright, amenable to advice and gentle without arrogance. Whether they are seen or unseen, whether they dwell far or near, whether they have come to be or will come to be, may all beings be inwardly happy. No one should deceive one another, nor despise anyone anywhere because of anger and thoughts of aversion. No one should wish suffering for another. Just as a mother would protect her son, her only son, with her own life, so one should develop toward all beings a state of mind without boundaries, and toward the whole world, one should develop loving kindness, a state of mind without boundaries, above, below, and across, unconfined, without enmity, without adversaries. Buddhadasa said, the entire cosmos is a cooperative. The sun, the moon, and the stars live together as a cooperative. The same is true for humans and animals, trees, and the earth. When we realize that the world is a mutual, interdependent, cooperative enterprise, then we can build a noble environment. If our lives are not based on this truth, we shall perish. We're definitely learning about that this week with the smoke that's going all over the world. Void mind. When we manage to see in this way, then we know that all things are void of self, that there is only the flowing on and spinning around of paticca samuppanna dhammas, dependently arising and ceasing without end. If we see like this, then we see voidness by way of vipassana. If we have true wisdom, we will see all of the forms, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and mind objects, all of those sense objects, as dependently arisen and void. That's from Buddhadasa again. So I Googled Casey Thompson. I was curious about all the Caseys that might be out there. And I saw one Casey Thompson who's a dog trainer and animal lover, another Casey Thompson who's a jazz musician, another Casey Thompson who teaches martial arts, a Casey Thompson who's a chemistry professor in London, a Casey Thompson who is a estate planner, a Casey Thompson who is a corporate lawyer, and then this is my Casey Thompson, who is, that's my senior photo. And it's just, again, this idea of ways to forge connections between everyone. That's the one of the deepest things for me, is this deep feeling of connectedness with everyone. Unsurpassed voidness. He understands. This field of perception is void of the taint of sensual desire. This field of perception is void of the taint of being. This field of perception is void of the taint of ignorance. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 sense bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness, supreme and unsurpassed. Therefore, Ananda, you should train thus. We will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. This is the last slide. So, actually, my daughter suggested that I use this slide when she was hearing me give this talk and practicing. It's true that the present is the present. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery. This is from the movie Kung Fu Panda. But today is a gift. That is why it is called the present. And that is absolutely true. Thank you so much for your time. I'll stop sharing and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Casey. It's very wonderful talk today. And I think you have a lot of questions. Kong, you have any? Kong?
Yes, sure. Yeah, first of all, can you hear me, Casey?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you. So this is, like I say, Paticca Samuppada is one of my favorite topics because I don't understand it. So therefore, I'm always curious to know more. I think this is the second time you take it through. So certainly very helpful for the deeper understanding. So we have a question here from Jay. Jay is asking that, do you have any thoughts on the German quote? The journey is the reward.
Yeah, that's perfect because, it's also like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's just to be in that step that you're in, right? Just in that present moment. That's where everything is alive. And dependent origination puts us in the past and the future. And so if we're in the past or the future, we know we're caught on the wheel. It's a good way to know.
Okay. Thank you. Don't know whether Jay have any reaction if he wants to. Let me see. One more question here from Alice, our big supporter. So her question to you, Casey, is you mentioned earlier about the highest Dhamma. The highest Dhamma is the highest truth. So if do, it is conditioned. No do, unconditioned thus. Thusness, is this what it is?
Yes, that's exactly it. And Alice, you inspired a lot of this talk by last time when you were asking me to get more into the mind. I was asking what you wanted. So I hope I delivered to you, because I really tried to explain more about how I feel like if we understand more about how our mind tricks us and how it works, then we can do a better job of learning how to practice emptiness and thusness. And thusness is basically meaning we accept whatever's happening in that moment. We accept it.
Okay. I do have a question myself. I think earlier you mentioned that how our mind works as an autopilot. And it means that a lot of time we can't control. So, and I was actually going through all the talks that we've actually went through. We talk about mindfulness. So at the end of the day, it goes back to how we are being mindful, so that we are aware of our thoughts, that we are straying away, or we are actually going through the view ourselves. So I think a lot of time it goes back to being mindfulness of our own self, of our own feelings, and knowing that we are not in the right direction. So a lot of time we grew up in a society that you share the Maslow hierarchy. All of us have been taught. So whatever that I'm hearing, sometimes I feel like this is going against the grain of what we have been taught. Yes. So how do we, how do we overcome this? You know what I mean? Because we are going against the grain, because the entire society, the entire world is conditioned that way. But we are taught to go against it. We want to be empty, but we wanted to feel. So how do we find that right balance?
Right, Irina would be able to.
Yeah, that's the whole crux of it. And that's one thing that I was trying to get through, is how we all can be hypnotized without even realizing it through repetition. And we've all been hypnotized to feel like we have a permanent self, and to want to be competitive, and to want to get ahead and get the rewards. And all of that just causes suffering. And I think for me, I just try and practice every day as much as possible. Whenever anything unpleasant happens, then there's that wheel again, and there's my I happening in it again. Someone's doing something to me, and there is no me. So every time I realize that, I laugh because there is no me for anything to be done to, and then it's all okay. And then you can respond with wisdom to that moment and take appropriate action. And I don't always succeed in that. I get caught all the time, but it's just that constant practice of trying. And by reading the Dhamma, it helps us to remember, because we can get off on the wrong track for years and forget. And then by staying close to the Dhamma and reading it and listening to the Venerables talk and doing that, then we are reinforcing this completely other way of living. And that's why I tried to do lots of quotes about thusness and emptiness, is because we have to shift our identity from the permanent I concept. We have to root it all out, all those seeds, and then shift it over to emptiness. And the mind wants to hold on to something. It wants to be an I. So it's very, very tricky, like that quote even of that young novice studying the Dhamma. It's very tricky. We have to constantly that's where the enlightenment factor of energy comes in, constantly applying that energy to try and figure that out.
Yeah, okay. My daughter's favorite quote is, she always say, "It is what it is." That's what she always said to remind me that. Yeah, so that is one of her favorite quotes that stuck in my mind. And yesterday we talked about my pen right, so I think it's also a good reminder that my pen right, is fine, it's okay. Okay, thank you. Let me see. Don't have any questions on the chat. Ajahn Riti?
Yes.
Ajahn Tanat, you want to share your thoughts on this from the Sangha perspective or anything?
Yes, I have some question I'd like to emphasize on this, that, okay, Dr. Casey, how to overcome the attachment. So please make it clear to all of the audience. Thank you.
So that's where the Anapanasati Sutta is so crucial, because if we return to our breath, then that calms our thoughts down. And so then when our thoughts calm and slow down, we can more easily observe the wheel happening. And that's where we can apply that mindfulness to be aware of what's happening. And then we can select a new habit. In my own life, I work on certain habits at any given time because it gets very overwhelming. We can't do everything at once. Even if I have awareness that I'm empty and that I'm not a permanent Casey, it still comes back all the time in smaller ways. There's all these tricky ways this attachment, this core attachment and misconception gets reinforced by my environment around me. So then it's a matter of just trying to do our best each day to maintain aware of emptiness and to practice meditation, calming our thoughts and calming our mind so that we have space. That's why, like last time, I didn't have this, but this time I do. I created these to put in between the links of dependent origination to show that even though it seems like a continuous process in our life, it really isn't. It really is more like a movie with individual screens. And the more we can become aware of that, then what we can do is we can notice and focus on the emptiness that's between them rather than the links that we're caught in. And then more and more, we can become more and more empty. Although in this case, we always have our sixth sense base as our form. We always have these things, but we don't need to have, we don't need to have those things, So it's where we place our attention. And in our own life, if we can place some attention on the space, going back to the breath, that emptiness, identifying back with the emptiness, then we have a chance to make a skillful decision in that moment.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Ajahn, do you have something maybe better even to say?
So, in order to overcome attachment, have to understand the concept of I and my, as you explained in the Buddha Dasa Bhikkhu books. So that good explanation in the book, and you did good job today. So I think about the 7 factor of enlightenment, Pochong Jet. 7 factor in the enlightenment. So Dhamma Vicaya, you do research for the Dhamma to understand in the deep aspect of the dependent origination that you have shared to us today. So that's a very, very useful and beneficial for all of us. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very nice, Casey and Dr. Tanat. When the people come to the temple, when we explain the Dhamma, and always I say that, okay, every moment, like Casey said today, every moment we practice, we have to know what we are doing. And when we talking Paticcasamuppada, I love the first, the bright man and leading the bright man. I don't know where they're leading to because of that means ignorant. When I usually do explain when the people, at the moment of contact, if the ignorance take over in that moment and lead you to be suffering. But if they have the mindfulness and wisdom, it's come and take over in that moment of contact. You have no suffering. I think the Casey, she is very, the more expert now in the Paticcasamuppada. And from the beginning, when she found the temple, the Buddha temple, she crying. I don't know if she remember that. She says they crying when found the temple because she brought the house close by the temple. When she searched the Buddhist temple around, the Wat Atam is maybe 5 minutes from home, And then she have learned from the book, from the many teacher. And I have heard it today, she going to write the book. Yeah, I think it's very good for for the American, understanding and writing and the language, by maybe easy to understand for most people. It's very nice, Casey. If you do it, start doing. It's very nice, and then we can do printing your book in this easy, no problem. But it's thank you very much. Do you have another? Do you have another question?
There's a lot of appreciation for Casey's talk. Yeah.
Okay.
This is very relate to our daily life, especially for lay people. So everyone look forward to your book, Casey.
The one thing I didn't talk about was the jhanas and talk more about meditation. That's that. If I was going to give another talk, I would talk more about how to meditate and the different jhana states, because it's very important to practice meditation and get that taste of emptiness so that then we can bring it into our daily life.
It can be, Casey. I know, baby, I'm thinking right now, but this project is going to end next week. Mm-hmm. This by the Ajahn Pasano. Ajahn Pasano is coming next week, and then after that, we're going to create another program again, but some kind teaching the Dhamma to practice how to talk Dhamma in English, and how to teaching them in how to learn English, and for another two for 3 months. And maybe the Dhamma Talk like this, and maybe we can have maybe one a month, or maybe let me see. When we talk with Ajahn Tanat and the Council of the Bhikhuss, and then we can.
But for the next program, I think everybody can join the class, because we will start teach the Dhamma in English. So means that you listen to the Dhamma Talk, because of some teacher, they will do the research, and then they want to train the Dhamma monk to speak, to understand the meaning of the Dhamma, some aspect. For instance, like Samadhi and Sati, how to explain to the one who not speak Thai or don't understand Pali language. So at the same time, we learn together and then practice together. So you are all welcome to join the Dhamma Talk class, but we try to focus on the Dhamma or any monks who want to improve their English speaking. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Alice, you have any more questions?
Alice.
Hello. Hi,
yes.
And Dr. Casey, thank you for your answer. And the topic is very, what I mean is like, it is, you have to accept it. But somehow, as a lay people, we always have a struggle, that is the life. This is our life. How can you be, emptiness, we still need to continue our life. We still need to live like a human. That is our nature. That is the actualization of a human nature, of our memory, conscious, unconscious mind, conditioned, unconditioned. That are the most difficult. For me, if whoever can practice until this level, I think it's an enlightenment, is the next Buddha.
It's really hard, Alice. but everything can be done with emptiness. Everything can be done with emptiness. So it's just trying to find that emptiness. Even just a moment of emptiness in your day is precious.
Yeah, I feel like if you really want to practice emptiness in actual life, just like in our daily life, sometimes people might misunderstand you. You have some mental problem because they don't understand. Why are you so weird? Sometimes they will say if you practice really detached, have no emotion, no feeling, that is not the human nature.
No, but it doesn't need to be that at all. Like the Buddha taught, that's why I ended with loving kindness, is because when you have emptiness, you have a deep love and compassion towards everyone and everything you do. Still laughing, still happy. So there's no reason to be like a robot. Emptiness doesn't mean a robot. Emptiness still means happy, joyful, just going about your present life, but accepting the conditions as they are.
There is a lot of conflict because we cannot have a happiness. When you have a happiness, you have sadness. So how you're going to get a balance? That is the detached, and some is depending on the condition. Sometimes you have to practice loving kindness. Yeah, we have to be compassion all the time. But the thing is, in real life, if you just take an example, if your own parents that you pass away, the sadness and all this, that is the emotion, that is the human nature. These are the most difficult, selfness that we have to detach. But I always practice that moment. That's why I say, okay, that moment, my feeling is that I can't, because human senses and all this, that is our nature. So I just practice on that moment and move on from that moment to another moment. That is, I believe in moment. I think moment to moment process will help us to detach from all this, detachment. I use moment to moment to detach, That is my method of practice the Dhamma.
I think Dr. Tanat had something he wanted to say about what we were saying.
Okay, can I share?
Yes.
At least your life now in the 21st century and in the lifetime of the Buddha, dukkha is the same thing or is different?
Same.
Yes, so that's why you can practice the Dhamma even you are in the age of 21st century now. Means that you live in any situation, but you can practice the Dhamma. Especially you said that you are very busy life. You are the lay person. You cannot do like the Dhamma that we have discussed. But okay, anyway, if you understand to practice voidness, you mentioned the voidness, emptiness, voidness. To overcome, you have to overcome the concept of self-center. In Bali, they call sakkaya titti. That means that you have self-center. So you attach to self. So the concept of overcome I and mine can destroy or eliminate the concept of self. So in Paticcasamuppada or in explanation of Luang Por Puttadasa, he emphasized on you can work, you can do your duty with empty mind, without attachment, means that attached to the self. Okay? Self is nothing. Because we attach to the people we love, that's why we suffer when they lost. So that's the cause of that effect. So we can practice it here and now, as Casey talking about mindfulness, living moment in moment. Okay? Be in the present moment. Not to cling too much to the past. It's already gone. And don't worry about the future. It's not come yet. So happy or suffering just in the moment. So, but we choose the happiness, not choose the suffering. Okay? Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
No question? No, you want to say anything? Okay. Nobody say anything. I would like to invite the most venerable Luang Po to close right now.
Okay, we have to pay let's play for technical, okay?
Okay.
อรหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังภะคะวันตังอภิวาเทสวากาโตภะคะวตาธัมโมธัมมังนัมมัสสามิโยมปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนะมา Okay, thank you very much for all people to join to listen the Cassie Thompson today. Very good speaker today.